Flirt FM, Galway's alternative radio station.
You're listening to the Galway Gamer on Flirt FM 101.3. My name is Eoghan Murphy and I am the Galway Gamer. And joining me on the line from San Diego is the master of the macabre, the apex of the anti-hero, if you will, the man behind Twisted Metal and God of War. I am talking to Mr. David Jaffe. David, welcome to the Galway Gamer on Flirt FM.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you having me. That's very kind of you.
It's absolutely fantastic to have you on. It really, really is. So I'm not going to beat around the bush. Things are going to get a little heavy here because we are talking about quite heavy games. So let's get into this. Let's start at the start of Twisted Metal, if you will. Now, when I began playing Twisted Metal, I started on Twisted Metal 2 back in the day, World Tour. Absolutely loved it. But the one thing that I heard more than anything else was people being confused by the fact that it wasn't a racer. How did you pitch Twisted Metal to begin with?
So I here's what I think it was, because it didn't really require much of a pitch, right? So this was the very first Twisted Metal was done on PlayStation 1, and we were developing it in 1994. 3D graphic short of a couple of games on things like PC, like Alone in the Dark had come out, and Disney Publishing had put a game out called Stunt Island that was like one of the first 3D games that, you know, mainstream audience had seen. But we really weren't that familiar with it. We had been sort of locked into this 2D paradigm, since the beginning, in terms of going all the way back to Space War. And the first game I had worked on was Mickey Mania, which was a 16-bit, hop and jump platform game. So we had gone out because we knew PlayStation was doing PlayStation was doing 3D. We had gone out to meet with a group of people at Evans and Sutherland that had been doing a lot of military simulations. And they also were a bunch of the guys that eventually broke off and started Pixar. But we had met with a group that wanted to do gaming, and they took us into a number of simulations that they had been working on over the years. One was this amazing sci-fi Blade Runner city that you could fly over in a hang glider. Another was flying around Mars, and my mind was blown, and I had my design partner there. I had my boss there. And so we're in the car on the way back from the airport in Los Angeles, stuck in traffic, and I'm like, it would be so cool to be able to blow all these cars away with machine guns and Mad Max-style rocket launchers and all that. And I think by the very nature of what we had just seen out in Utah at Evans and Sutherland, the 3D databases and that fantasy, I think for us, we automatically just assumed it wasn't going to be a racer, and we assumed it was going to be almost like Doom in cars. But I'll tell you, and things have changed so much in games. The budget for Twisted Metal 1 was about $850K. And the greenlight process at Sony today, or any big company today, is just a huge battle of political, creative, and compromise hoops that one has to jump through before the company opens up its pocketbook and says, here's $250 million. But back in the day, it was literally, we were sitting in a room at Sony with Sony marketing, and our head of the company was like, okay, let's go around the table and tell marketing what you want to make. And they got to me, and I said, it's basically like, it's called battle cars, and it's cars with guns. And the head of marketing is like, okay, cool, make that. Right? So there was no sense of, is it racing? Is it 3D? They're just like guns and cars. We can sell that next. And so it was a very different time. But I will tell you, though, that, yes, when we were trying to market it, there was a lot of confusion, people not understanding that this was basically Doom in cars, and it wasn't, a track-based racing game. So it took a while. But by the time Twisted Metal 2, which is the one you started with, came out, it was people knew what it was. And it became a very successful franchise for that first generation PlayStation.
I remember trying to explain to my friends that instead of being a racer, it was more like playing Mortal Kombat with vehicles.
Yeah, Doom and Mortal Kombat and Mario Kart Battle Mode were the three big gaming inspirations for Twisted Metal.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Well, over here in Europe, unfortunately, we got kind of the short end of the stick when it comes to Twisted Metal. We missed out on a number of Twisted Metal titles. They never made it over here. The likes of the original Twisted Metal and Twisted Metal Black. We never got the cutscenes in game. We seem to get kind of flushed down versions of them, unfortunately, cut up versions. Right. Do you have any idea why that is?
Sure. The I can't speak to Sony now because it's a very different company, but when I was there, SCEE, which was the European arm of the publishing division, they didn't like it. They didn't get it. They thought it was stupid. They thought it was loud, obnoxious. They didn't think they could sell it in Europe. And, it did well enough that after Twisted Metal 1, they're like, okay, we'll bring it over here. But they were never going to bend over backwards to really promote it. And so it was just a cultural difference in the sense that we knew there were fans over there, but we also knew that very much similar to Psygnosis's Wipeout, which was a hit over here critically, and it did some numbers, but it was never as big of a game as it was in Europe. There was just sort of a cultural sensibility about sort of the rave scene and that kind of art style and that kind of very clean sci-fi aesthetic that tends to go down, and be more embraced in a lot of European countries versus in America, which is a bit more raw and rough around the edges with intellectual properties that they embrace. So Twisted Metal was always kind of looked at like, yeah, I guess if you publish Wipeout or if you publish, whatever, we'll try to sell 20,000 copies of your stupid card game. That was pretty much the way it was. And with Black, that really, though, now I could have been lied to, but I don't think I was, because the story I was told, I remember being called in my boss's office and they said, look, and this applied to God of War as well. My understanding, and maybe it's not every country in Europe, but there were enough countries that had this policy or this law, frankly, that, and because, as you know, a lot of the European titles don't have there's not like a France version and a version for Italy and a version for Britain. It's all one kind of big thing, and maybe once or twice there's two where it's just like this is the European SKU and it's got a bunch of different languages and stuff. And so in that, what I was told was that there were certain countries, and England may have been one of them, that was like legally there are government bodies that say, you can't release certain things here. Like if you put out something like Twisted Metal, legally you're not allowed to put it on the shelf because it crosses certain lines. Now, whether that's a German law or a French law I don't know. And so they were saying if you want to release in Europe, you're going to have to cut these stories out of Twisted Metal Black because they're really crossing a lot of lines that, we can't cross in order for them to sell the game in stores. And I was like, well, I guess, the game is good. I was proud of the game we made. And so I was like, fuck it. Just sorry. I was like, yeah, let's just put it out and, without the stories, but I hated we had to do that. But we had to make concessions for God of War 1 as well.
That's heavy. That is harsh. I remember, we didn't get the cutscenes in Twisted Metal Black, but we did get the little end roll of credits with Rolling Stone playing over it, and you could see little bits of the cutscenes in there, and it used to absolutely drive me crazy because I needed to know more. And unfortunately, this was before we had the likes of YouTube to investigate and find out what those stories were, and it was my heart a little.
Yeah, I mean, the fan base there. I know there are fans over there, and I love that we have fans all over the world of that series, but I guess from Sony's mind, it was just one of those. It just wasn't a important enough, financially speaking, franchise for them to sort of bend over backwards and go, okay, let's hire an editor and let's re-edit the movies at least to make it so that the European audience gets the storytelling, but just some of the things that might be deemed too dark for that audience to be, not the audience, but for the powers that be. at least they would accept what we turned in. They were probably just like, well, you can release it or not, but if you release it, you got to cut all this stuff. We're not going to bend over backwards to help you guys make the game better for this localization.
Well, let's talk about a bit of that content, though, because especially in Twisted Metal Black. Now, Twisted Metal 2, I think, is the Twisted Metal 2 and the PSP version of Twisted Metal Head-On. We didn't get the PS2 version, but I think the PSP version of that and Twisted Metal 2 are the only Twisted Metals that we got full over here. But let's talk about Twisted Metal Black, because that had the darkest moments in Twisted Metal, if you ask me. Because each of the characters was an escapee from Blackfield Asylum. It delved into all sorts of mental health issues. We're talking multiple personalities, depression, self-mutilation, rage, post-traumatic stress disorder. It was all presented, and it was presented quite dark, quite heavy. If you were to tackle that today, would you tackle it the same way, considering we kind of look at mental health differently in 2023? Would you go down the same route you originally did, or would you change it up?
Well, I think that certainly it has been a wonderful positive shift that mental health in regards to tragically regular cases of things like depression or eating disorders or self-mutilation, suicide, all those things, back when we were writing it, it wasn't that we were being insensitive. We were, but we didn't know it. We were just sort of following the tropes of, oh, that's kind of creepy and weird and scary. And so that's kind of just where the needle was. And it never occurred to us, as it never occurred to a lot of people at the time, to sort of think about, well, wait a minute, these are real people, not in the game, but people who suffer from this are real people with real problems. So certainly I don't think you can tell the story of someone, if you're using a mental illness that is a real mental illness, not like a fictionalized something made up, as a storytelling device today, I think, yeah, you do owe it to just karma and the kindness of being human with other humans on the planet to go, let me at the very least research this to make sure that I'm not, playing into the process of stigmatizing people who are really suffering for entertainment. But that said, for example, I'm doing a horror game right now, and one of the things we're exploring is the idea of a character who does have post-traumatic stress. And it's like I'm not willing to do it if it's just like a throwaway line. I want to be able to go, okay, let me understand this well enough that we can be respectful if we actually make that one of the character challenges that they're dealing with. But all that said, though, I will also say that I think it's important to be able to still, I got to express this well because I've never said it before, and I've never really thought how to articulate it, but I think there is something fundamentally terrifying about the facade of I have my life together, and that ranges from everything from sort of just, your life can change in the blink of an eye by some horrible accident, and then everything today is different than yesterday, all the way to that to, your perception of reality can change to the point, whether you're talking about doing it with psychedelics or having a mental disorder or an accident or just some sort of euphoric moment via meditation. I think the awareness of how chaotic and random life is, and also how limited we are to process what life really is and what is going on, and how fragile our current perception of normal is. I think it would be a real shame if that wasn't able to be fodder for horror, because I think you can still be sympathetic to people who are suffering from real mental disorders and still be utterly terrified and fascinated by the fact that we're all probably a tiny little chemical shift away from being called crazy. And I think there's something about that is just terrifying and worth exploring in stories.
Excellent, excellent. No, just
not really.
It's
terrifying.
No, I meant the way you put it was excellent.
No, I know.
Definitely, yeah. It's as intriguing as it is frightening, for sure.
Yes.
Just to wrap up on Twisted Metal before we move on to God of War, David. Now, I've always believed that your PlayStation isn't a PlayStation unless it's got a Twisted Metal game on it, and unfortunately, we haven't seen one in a few generations now. Yeah. And I know you're not involved in Twisted Metal anymore at the moment, but do you know whereabouts the IP lies right now? Is it just in the void?
No, so they're making a TV show. They've already shot the first season. It's got a really great group of people working on it. It's a lot of the producers and writers of Zombieland 2, the Cobra Kai TV series, which I freaking love on Netflix. I want to say some of them also worked on Deadpool. So, and then in front of the camera, Will Arnett's one of the producers. He's doing the voice of Sweet Tooth. Samoa Joe, who is a WWE wrestler, is the body of Sweet Tooth, kind of like Darth Vader, cool. With two different performers. And then Nev Campbell from Scream is in it, and Howard Mackey, who's the Falcon in MCU, plays the main character in it. So, I mean, it's a good group of people. I am not involved with it. They kind of keep me abreast of what's going on from time to time. I know kind of what it is. I know how it deviates from the game, and I know how it's similar to the game. So I'm looking forward to seeing it. But I know they're doing that, and I know there is a Twisted Metal game of some sort in development. I absolutely know that's true. But I don't know who's doing it. I don't know if it's based off the TV show. I don't know if it's multiplayer only. I have no idea what it is. But for a fact, I can tell you there is a Twisted Metal game in development, but it hasn't been announced yet. And I don't know anything else other than they are making one.
Interesting. There's something. There will be something out there for us starving TM fans after all.
Certainly the show. I mean, unless the show after they edit it is so terrible that they decide not to air it, which I don't see happening, you'll at least get a show. That we know.
Cool.
And you'll probably be getting a game, but I don't know.
Okay, well, let's move on to your other heavy hitter then, David, which is God of War. Now, this came out, I'm going to say 2005, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct.
And anti-heroes were big at the time. You got the Tommy Vercetti in the GTA games, for example. You got the likes of Max Payne. But mostly they were all kind of gun-toting, many of them kind of leather-clad. Why put your anti-hero in a classic Greek mythology as opposed to modern day?
Well, so the Greek mythology came first. The idea of doing a action-adventure, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Ray Harryhausen mashup, that was sort of the impetus. And I look back, and it's actually was not intentional, but it's either just kind of nicely coincidental or potentially poetic or a revelation that we are living in a simulation, that Clash of the Titans and Raiders of the Lost Ark, which were huge, just massive events in my life regarding my creative life as I was 10 years old, both of those came out on the same day in theaters in America, and both of them were at the exact same movie theater, and I saw them both at that theater. And so to me, I'm just like, that's so weird to me that those two movies really had inspired me to go off and try to become a professional creator. And so God of War began as an homage, or really not even an homage, live in those worlds. It was a selfish desire of I want to go have an action adventure that feels like I'm the star of Indiana Jones and Clash of the Titans. And so that's, and then there were a couple games we were looking at making. That's the one we picked within Sony Santa Monica to go with for a variety of reasons. And then as we started designing the character, the first knee jerk was just to build sort of a Hollywood-centric design of a character from Clash of the Titans, like a guy with a toga and sandals and all this. And it was very evident very quickly, because I did want the game to be very, very violent and brutal. I just like that stuff. And I remember the pitch was, What if Paul Verhoeven or Ridley Scott directed Clash of the Titans? That was sort of the high concept. And if you don't know who those people are, they're certainly Paul Verhoeven. I mean, he did RoboCop and Total Recall, and he's done a lot of very violent genre movies that are just wonderful movies. But anyway, so, you know, I knew it needed to be M-rated. I knew I wanted it to be violent and sexy and evoke Heavy Metal Magazine and Heavy Metal the movie. But I also knew when I saw that character running around, the kind of guy who looked like he was just a dude at a toga party, I'm like, okay, this is not going to sell. It's like as much as Medusa and Cyclopses and bloody and gory violent battles and sexy ladies with no shirts on will sell, no one wants to play this guy. He just looks like a dork running around, in a frat party, toga party. And so immediately we started going, okay, this guy needs to be more brutal. He needs to be, badass. So it wasn't so much a conscious choice of like, let's make an anti-hero. It was more like, we like characters for this game. We were inspired by the Punisher and Wolverine and not the political takes on Russell Crowe's character in Romper Stomper or Ed Norton's political takes in American History X. But though the way they portrayed those characters were very violent and brutal and animalistic in nature. And we were like, okay, that's what we want, but let's put it in Greek mythology. And it took us a long time to find a visual expression of that worked for both the time period and a commercial setting for a game. But yeah, that was the reason we did it. It wasn't that we were sort of going, the anti-hero didn't come first. And the anti-hero, I think, showed up because the anti-hero was like, hey, fellas, if you don't put me in there, you ain't selling many copies of this. Yeah. And which was fine because I love Kratos. I love that version of Kratos.
When we talk about God of War, then we talk about the that kind of wide radius combat that Kratos brings to the field with his Blades of Chaos. These almost whip-like weapons, and that became the norm for a couple of years in action games on pretty much until Batman Arkham Asylum, and everybody started copying the parry system for that. But there were a lot of these wide radius style characters then over the next couple of years. We look at the likes of Ghost Rider game, we look at the likes of Dante's Inferno. Did any of these God of War clones, as they called them, stand out to you?
Well, I only got to play Ghost Rider on, I think it was a PSP title. So I just, even back when I was, at the time I must have been in my early 30s or mid 30s, I didn't have the eyes to really play an action game like that, moving that fast with the camera pulled back that far on PSP. So I love the character of Ghost Rider. I think that kind of game is a perfect fit for Ghost Rider. But I can't speak to the quality or my enjoyment of it because I didn't play it for very long, but that had everything to do with the platform it was on. Now, Dante's Inferno was a game that for many, many years people would say to me, don't you hate that game? It's a direct ripoff of God of War. And I had never played it. And I played it about a year ago for the first time. It was on Game Pass. And I'm like, I'll play this. Let me see what this is. And I haven't finished it, but I rarely finish games. But I love it. I think it's absolutely fantastic. And so, yeah, I mean, it's clear that it owes some of its existence to God of War's success and God of War's gameplay and camera system and all that. But, God of War doesn't exist without Ico and Devil May Cry and Onimusha. So everybody builds on what came before, within reason. I'm not suggesting people rip people off, but in terms of sort of the influences of the language of game design just sort of marbles into the zeitgeist of game designers. And so I never had a problem with it like people assumed I would. And frankly, as it relates to not Devil May Cry, Dante's Inferno, I thought and think that is a fantastic game.
I think Dante's Inferno gets a bad rap personally. I think it's phenomenal. I think the art style and some of the visuals are so haunting throughout that game. They're amazing. Wonderful. I do think it's unfortunate that it gets such a bad rap. But let's move back to Kratos as a character then. Now, when we first meet Kratos at the very start of the original game, he's tossing himself off a cliff, attempting suicide. He says the gods have abandoned him, and he throws caution to the wind. Now, you stuck around for the first handful of games, then you moved on. Corey Barlog took over, and is doing an absolutely marvelous job. But if you had stayed with Kratos, would he have sorted himself out? Would he have sorted his anger issues out in the end? Would he have become the better guy?
No, I don't. I will say this with the utmost respect for Sony Santa Monica and what Corey and Eric and those guys and girls have done. Like, I loved God of War 2018. I didn't enjoy Ragnarok so much. I didn't like the pacing of that game, but both games are sort of tip of the spear when it comes to production value, audio, music, voice acting, graphics, control. The combat is great. I have nothing bad about those games to say. I will just say that I don't particularly like Kratos, or I don't dislike him as a human. He seems like a much more decent guy now, but that doesn't really appeal to me for that character. So for me, and you can find this on YouTube, I was with Corey and Stig, who directed the third game, and Rue and Dana, who directed the PSP games or the Vita game, I forget. And we were doing this thing called Game Directors Live or something, and they recorded it, and it's on YouTube, and it was all the God of War directors talking. And at one section in that video, I go into the narrative that was going to be God of War 3 when I was considering directing God of War 3 for a short amount of time, and I was writing it. And for me, it was, Kratos is, not entirely, but in some ways he has become, or in my mind, I don't mean culturally in the real world, but as a character, after he ascended to godhood and stuff, to me, he really, he's still got his human side, but he's almost like Freddy Krueger or Jason in that, yes, they're, you can go, oh, Jason Voorhees from Friday the 13th was a little kid, and Freddy Krueger was this guy, Fred Krueger, who was, raped all these nuns and stuff. But fundamentally, they almost shift and morph into forces of nature. And so I liked that Kratos, retained that sense of a vessel to represent just furiousness and anger and drive and passion. And at the end of my story of Kratos, he finally was able to get rid of all of the gods and kill himself. But things happened, and he basically realized that man can never live without the gods, and the gods rise back up in the form of our new gods, like Judaism and Islam and Christianity. Okay. And so he has the blades of chaos melted down on the river Styx before the river Styx is destroyed with the rest of the ancient beliefs. And it becomes the scythe for the Grim Reaper. And right now, in my mind, Kratos has become the Grim Reaper, and he's out there even in 2023 doing his killing. He's just doing it in the guise of sort of this new character or this new job he has taken on, which is death itself.
That is cool.
Yeah, and I find that, like, I don't need the redemption for Kratos. I get that some people do, and a lot of people love it. I like the archetypes. I like when big mythic entertainment stories, whether they succeed or not, I don't need to see the humanity in Kratos other than just like every now and then it's there, and that's kind of cool that deep inside there's this guy fighting to get out. But I don't want to see Kratos become a nice guy. I don't need to see Kratos mellow and mature. He's a thunderstorm. I'm not looking for that in that character any more than I want the Hulk to just calm down and settle down and raise a couple of kids. He's the Hulk. Let him be the Hulk. That's what's appealing about him. But again, I'm a minority because the new God of Wars are crackerjack. They're selling like crazy. So it's not my God of War, but I certainly respect it for the quality and much loved new product that it is.
Just to wrap up then, and move on from the game side of things to nowadays you are currently running, and you have been for a number of years now, an online chat show called Gavin Games.
Yes.
Now, tell me, what takes a game director from the hot seat to doing live chat streams? Why did you take that direction?
Well, so I had done a game. I left Sony. I did another Twisted Metal 2012 with a company called EC Play. I like those guys a great deal over there, but we were having creative differences. We wanted to make different kinds of things, so I started another company called the Bartlett Jones Supernatural Detective Agency in San Diego. We made a game which was sort of the biggest failure of my career. It was critically just slaughtered, unnecessarily so, I think, but whatever. And it commercially has its fans, but nothing in any meaningful way. And even though it was a low budget game, we will never make our money back. So ultimately that led to us having to shut the company down. And there was a sense of, okay, I'm going to go take some time, walk on the beach in San Diego, for 4 or 5 months, mourn, grieve, cry, figure out my life, pick myself up, and step back up to the plate and keep swinging, because that's everybody has failures. But as I was doing that and prepared for that and going, okay, the walks on the beaches occurred, but the tears never came, the grieving never came. And there was a sense of going, I'm done with that. Like, it felt like a really nice chapter, which has offered me so many great things in my life, was kind of over. And I had always been, I've had a YouTube channel since almost the very beginning. I've always been doing behind the scenes footage and stupid videos, and I always enjoyed that. And so I think between just going, okay, well, I'm in a fortunate position that I can kind of do whatever I want. Everybody was getting into podcasts, and I was like, I like being on camera. I like discussing and debating and arguing things with people. That's always been fun for me since I was a kid. I'm like, let me try that for a while. And I remember the minute I did the first show, or maybe it was like the second or third show, and I had this guy call in, identifies as a furry. They're into furry culture and all this stuff.
Yeah.
And I had never spoken to anyone. They had just sort of been locked community, because from the outside looking in, it seems hilarious. And so the guy calls in, and I was like, wow, I had this conversation with this guy I never would have talked to otherwise. And even though I don't want to run out and put on a fox costume, it was nice to hear a perspective that I was like, oh, okay, it's not for me, but I respect that. I get that. And I was euphoric. I was like, what a neat thing that I can just talk to people all over the world and debate and discuss and learn. And I'm not, my show is very bawdy and dumb and X-rated or R-rated. I'm not trying to be NPR and like, let me get to the nuance of life, but it's still, I think I just fell in love with it. And so I think it was partially that. And it was also the fact that the game industry really, at least at the level I was playing, has changed so much. And I didn't want to, it wasn't worth it to me as a guy who had won all the awards and made some decent money and contributed to the cultural zeitgeist of gaming with my contributions. I felt like I had done it. And then the idea of like, okay, Jaffe, so you're going to have to start getting up at 5 a.m. again to fly all over the fucking world to raise money for another company and start pitching people and making concessions to your ideas. So this, assistant producer that for whatever reason plays the game really well at Ubisoft, so I have to get that guy in. So I'm going to change the protagonist to something he likes for just some random reason. So he'll tell his boss, this is a game we should make. And I was just like, oh, I don't have the drive or the interest or the
too long in the tooth forward. Like,
I just don't care enough anymore about the rewards that come at the end of that to work that hard and to concede that much just to get the outcome. And so what was really interesting is, so I gave it up, happy to give it up. And a lot of gamers never understood it, and they were acting like, oh, you must be bitter at Sony. Sony always treated me great. The very reason that I can do my show, which makes, grateful for the money it makes, but it's not like I'm making real money off my thing. I just love doing it. The reason I can do it is because Sony paid me so well over the years and treated me so well. I have nothing but love for Sony. I don't agree with a lot of the stuff they're doing, but as people that I know over there, I still have great affection for. But what was really interesting, though, is in the course of doing that, this company called Movie Games reached out to me, which is a small publisher in Poland, and they do kind of horror games and indie games. And I said, okay, they wanted me to be a consultant. I've done that. Then they said, hey, how would you feel about creative directing a game again with us? And so far, it's very early. It may never get off the ground. I'm not like, there's a new game coming. But it's roughly designed. We're talking to teams about making it. And it feels like working with Sony back in the PS1, PS2 days, which is, of course, everyone
that kind of freedom like.
Yes, everyone has opinions. Everybody wants to contribute. There are disagreements. But end of the day, it's not like this political minefield of like 20 departments and $250 million budgets that really it becomes as much about playing the political and the Machiavellian maneuvering game as it is about being a creative game designer. And so because that has offered itself up to me, I'm enjoying being back in that world a little bit. We'll see where it goes. But the idea of going back to proper AAA game development, there's nothing in the world. I was offered a $100 million game, which isn't a lot, honestly, for AAA. But I don't think you could make it for $100 million. But that's where you start, and then the publisher's over a barrel, and they have to give you more money because I can't make that for $100 million. But anyway, and I was like, yeah, I don't want to do it for a couple of reasons. But one of them, not the main one, but one of them was like, I done it, and I don't want to have to beg for the money, and it's not appealing to me at all. If I was to start again, or if I were to be 20 years old again doing this, there's no way I imagine I would want to. I would much rather be in the indie space, not because I'm want to make artistic statements, but because I want to make boomer shooters, and I want to make gory games, and I want to do stuff like Lollipop Chainsaw and Twisted Metal. I'm not interested in being a AAA game director. It's not for me.
Oh, that's fair. That is more than fair. So anyone who's listening and has not checked you out on YouTube and checked out your stream, where can they catch you, David?
The easiest way to find me, just because, YouTube's getting better with handles, but it's called Gabbin, Gabbin, and games, or just go to YouTube and type David Jaffe, or easier than that, just go to Twitter and do @DavidScottJaffe, or just Google me. I'm all over the place, Jaffe, and you'll eventually find the YouTube show. And we do Gabbin and Games 2 to 4 times a week, and then we do all kinds of stuff with members. We have a show called Pot and Popcorn where I get stupidly high and we watch horrible movies together. That's a lot of fun. We're watching one I think this weekend called Robo Geisha, which is the craziest thing I think I've ever seen in my life. And it's a lot of fun. And then we also do deep dives on game design. We're going to start doing a game club, game a month with deep discussion into it. I think the first game we're doing in February is called Madison, which is a great horror indie game that came out a couple of months back. So find me on the internet. I'd love to have you as part of our community and chat and gab games with you. That'd be a lot.
Cool. Fantastic. Then, David, thank you so much for taking the time today to come on the Galway Gamer. It's been absolutely amazing chatting with you. Oh,
good. I enjoyed it. I loved being here. Thank you for having me. And I wish I lived there and not here because America's a shithole. But anyway, thank you for having me. I do appreciate it. And I hope to talk to you soon, man.
Rock and roll. Thank you, sir.
See you, bud.
101.3 Flirt FM.